Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. I'm your host, Michael Manley, and I'm very happy to be welcoming this week financial advisor, trumpet player, and TAPS founder, Larry Ransom. So welcome to the show, Larry.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on to hear about your journey, which has involved being a musician throughout your career in some form or another, although you do have a pretty robust career as a financial advisor, which we're going to get into, and also to learn about your organization, TAPS, that you founded. So why don't we start with how you go from majoring in music, trumpet, to how you got to be a financial advisor?
So everything, it's a great question, but everything in my life I've done as a reaction to some massive, impactful moment that I had. So the entire idea of being a musician was never in my plan. I had planned on being a doctor or something like that when I was a kid. That's what I always wanted to be. And then we had a very negative experience with the medical field in my family, and it kind of steered me out of all of that. And the only thing I knew how to do was play the trumpet, although quite badly and wrongly. So I went up to college and said, somebody's going to teach me how to get better. And luckily I met Walt Blanton, who had 100% faith in my ability, regardless of all the struggles I had to go through. And that taught me probably one of my biggest life lessons is you have to have an unending faith that things will work out if you ever hope for them to actually work out. So, and so then I just steered my path 100% towards being a musician and started working freelance. And I think the height of it all, I ended up getting on a 6-night-a-week show. And that was amazing. What an incredible experience over at Phantom that we had. But along the way, I got really serious with a wonderful lady who is now my wife. And when I called my parents to talk to them about, getting marriage advice and how to be a good husband and all that fine stuff, I found out that they were getting a divorce in that very same phone call. And I went, oh man, well that's not really that's not a very optimistic
Doesn't bode well, right?
My future marriage here, so I dug deeper, found out that there was a lot of family stresses, emotional stresses, bad management of money. And I thought, well, there's nothing I can control there, but I can learn about money. So I called up a few people, and the first person that actually could give me how they could have actually helped my parents along 10 years prior to that, I said, teach me everything you know. Because I needed to know, right? I wanted to be the best husband I could and never have the same issues. So I started learning everything I could about money, fell in love with the idea of teaching people how to be better with their own money. And there you go. I ended up in the industry, got fully licensed, started bringing on clients. And now I have a fully functioning practice, and it's wonderful. It's a lifelong calling,
That's a really great story. And so it was a very negative kind of personal experience that led you to want to help others. And I think it's not an uncommon story, I think, about how stressful money is for a lot of people. And, I know that when I grew up, it was always, there was always a lot of scarcity around money, a lot of stress around money. And as an artist, I think we often internalize that as, I'm lucky to do what I do. I shouldn't demand too much for it because I'm lucky to get paid anything. And if I don't work for this low wage, somebody else will, or whatever those stories are that we tell ourselves that are all around fear around money. And I think it's like a really huge hurdle to get people over. And it's a mindset shift, really.
It's entirely that. And the hardest part is not only worrying about getting paid too little for what you do, but also constantly be worried about what is the right number for what I do get paid for what I do. And it becomes an arbitrary thing when somebody else determines the value of your time. And if I could go back maybe in the day, what business has taught me is something that music never really did, is that you establish your worth or what people are willing to pay you based on the value you bring to them. So they don't see the endless hours in the practice room that you're putting in. They don't see the endless music that you're listening to. They don't see the concertos you're working on, or the transcriptions you're working on, and they don't see any of that. So they have no idea of what they're buying for your value. And then in the end, right, what's, as far as a commercial music or even being a symphonic musician, the audience has to get what they want out of that. The value we bring has to be something they're interested in if they're going to pay us for it, and pay us handsomely. So I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is we internalize what we think is awesome and what we think is valuable, because it's what we're interested in, but most of the time there's nothing to do with what they're interested in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to find that delicate balance of, not being so money driven, and being more driven about what value are you bringing to the industry, to the marketplace, to the audience. And when you do that, the money will be there.
Yeah. And I think you said something that I've heard before, and it really, it was a really earth-shaking moment for me, right? And which is about your value being internal versus external. And so there's a great author named Kyle Cease, and he's written a book called The Illusion of Money, which is an amazing book. And he talks about how we always focus on the external value that others want to put on us, versus investing in our own value, right? That we bring. And he uses the example of, like, if you took Oprah Winfrey and you took away all of her money immediately, if she had $0 tomorrow, she would probably be a millionaire within
a very short amount of time,
because her value is so high internally, what she brings, her skills, her talents, the way she gives to the world. And we're so focused on what somebody's willing to pay us that we don't stop to think about, well, what value am I bringing, and how do I serve the world with that value in the most way that's going to give me success and also financial success, right? And financial gain. And I think I've talked about this before on the show, like one of the things that it's like these narratives that we buy into, like around the fact that, like, well, the arts don't make money, right? But like people that are going to see a concert at your local hall are going to be, first of all, they might be working for a company like IBM that has an office there because they wanted to be in a city that had culture, right? Or they might be going to a restaurant or a bar afterwards. And there's all these people making money on the arts, but because ticket sales don't cover what we do, we internalize this message that, oh, well, we don't generate profit, right? Whereas we bring this value that is like huge to a community and to the world.
Yeah.
So that's a really profound way of looking at it, is internal versus external value.
Absolutely, right? And external value meaning, what others define our value as, but internal value, I would want to talk about that. If I were going to talk about that even more, I would want to think about, you have to know yourself to actually know what that internal value is, right? So when you're starting out, and I don't care who you are, but when you're first starting out, you got to play as many free gigs as you can get on. You play anything and everything you get your hands on. Why? Because you need the experience. You would need to learn how to not stumble, because if somebody's going to pay you $300 or $400 for your time that night, they don't want to hear you learning on the job, right? So you got to have avenues to go learn on the job and understand how you actually can be of great value. You also can learn what you're really good and what you're not good at. And so how you can sell yourself to other people so that they understand that they're going to get the very best you every time they call, right? I was talking with a networking group that I'm in, and I told them, actually the vast majority of calls I ever get are from other trumpet players. But the thing is those trumpet players know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, right? They're not going to call me to go sub on a rock band. That's just not my forte. You know what I mean? But if they get called for an orchestra gig that they're afraid they're not going to sound too great on, they might give me a shot at that because I'll probably do good, you know.
Yeah.
And we all find our specialty, we all find our niches, and I would want to focus on that niche and really get good at it, so then I have an established value, you know, and then people know that when they call me for that, then I'm going to get really good at that, you know, and it's going to be great. The other part of the internal value is if you know who you are, what you're good at, then you can design your own content to fit the marketplace and bring something really cool. That's how you're going to make money, because you're right. There are so many musicians out there making plenty of money. Well, how did they do it? How did they figure it out?
Yeah.
They
And
knew what they're good at. They knew themselves, what they loved. They shedded it, and they found a way to bring it to the market, and they went after it. And they're doing great.
yeah, and I think that is going to be the big tipping point for artists in the future, right? Like we're already seeing it where, you know, we as classical musicians and looking at that narrow niche, we can no longer count on legacy institutions, right? Like, you know, there's one or two trumpet players in a year who might land a job in a major orchestra that pays them a living wage, right? So that's not really a viable. And what we saw with COVID was even some of those major institutions they weren't really there for their artists during COVID. And we had people that are, you know, working at the Metropolitan Opera or other big institutions who are like, wow, I thought this was like the securest job in the world. And it turns out that actually it's not. And so I think, you know, that kind of like creative, how do I actually create a market for what I do? How do I think about serving in a way that's going to benefit me, but also society? And, you know, I could kill myself. Like my niche that I'm exploring is pedagogy for very beginning, returning, and recovering French horn players, right? Okay. Because there's zero good pedagogy for that niche, right? Yeah. And I'm like, I could kill myself and try to win a first horn job. Not going to happen probably because I'm more of a low horn player. So like I could beat myself up and quit my job and play Beethoven 7 until I'm blue in the face. Or I could do this, which I know that I'm already good at and which nobody else is doing, right? Yeah. It's like you got to find that place where your success is going to be more likely. And it's probably going to be doing something you love, because if you don't love it, you're probably not going to be successful anyway.
No, and the only thing that teaches you what you really love is the experience of doing, right? Getting out there, trying everything in the beginning until you go like, okay, I'm really good at this, not so good at that. I really love doing this, but I've really never been great at that, and I hate doing that. You know, and you begin to learn those things. You know yourself. So I mean, you gotta to understand your value, you've got to really know you more than anybody else, and you've got to be honest with yourself about what that value is, and what you're passionate about, what you enjoy doing. I love to teach. Absolutely love to teach. It doesn't matter what it is. I just love to teach. And so when it ended up being money, I could watch people grow and retire and live a good full life, and I had something to do with that. The feeling you get, the goodwill in here, that was my calling. When I knew it, I was all in. And whatever it is that you want to do, you got to be all in. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also we mythologize and we idealize these goals that we have as young people. And I've met plenty of, for example, orchestral musicians who had long careers in major orchestras, and they were looking for teaching gigs. They're like, I'm so bored, I can't wait to get a university gig or whatever. And so it's often like you realize, well, maybe that's not like the shining gold brass ring that I thought it was. Like every job has its ups and downs, even those. And so, you know, I think we're coming out of this this kind of culture within the school systems where we say, well, my teacher was so and so, and they played principal, and in the New York Philharmonic, and that's why I play principal in the New York Philharmonic, and I teach people that are going to be future principals. And it's like, well, everybody can't be principal of the New York Philharmonic, right? So it's like, so you end up graduating a lot of people who just feel a sense of loss or disappointment because the path didn't go the way they thought it was, but the path is only there for like 5 people, right? So, so I think that culture is changing within education, and I think within musicians also, people are realizing I can, like for me, I love playing chamber music. That's probably my biggest playing passion, right? And you know, playing chamber music even without getting paid for it, but saying, hey, if I rehearse with this group enough, maybe we can actually start gigging or something. And but knowing that you, in that realm of music, you can't really wing it, right? Like, so the value of chamber music and the thing that is so costly in terms of the investment is that it takes a lot of time, because you have to have 5 to 6 or 4 to 8 people or whatever rehearsing together all the time before they sound good, right? I mean, I've done those gigs, I'm sure you have too, where somebody's like, hey, I've got a brass quintet gig or whatever, and you show up and you're like sight reading music with 4 other people. And it's like, you can get away with that maybe if you're in an orchestra of 100 people, but when it's 5 of you, it really is like hard to hide. And so chamber music is one of those things that really requires a lot of passion and investment of those folks that want to do it. But then again, you get to that place and you're like, wow, there's nobody else in our town that's doing this at the level we're doing it. Like, how do we now succeed at it? You know?
And that is such an amazing point, right? It is such an amazing point. In the world of business, you have to do everything for free until you establish your value. And then at some point, somebody says it's worth buying your product or your service. And at that point is when all the work, the blood, sweat, tear, risk, everything that you've put in suddenly has a value. Somebody was willing to pay for it. And I think musicians make this mistake all the time, right? I can't tell you how many brass quintets I've been a part of that started up, right? And we rehearse, and then nobody ever gets a gig, and so the whole thing falls down. But nobody actually went out and marketed it.
Right.
Nobody put YouTube videos up, and nobody called booking agencies. Nobody called every casino and venue in town, and nobody set up 400 concerts that we did for free just because we need to get known, right? Those are all things that have to happen so you can actually have a value in the marketplace that somebody eventually is willing to pay for, right? I think about like a can of soda, right? If I was going to go buy a can of Coke versus a can of RC Cola or something, some other off-brand, right? Almost everybody picks Coke. And if you think about what goes into a Coke, at some point you have all these ingredients that get farmed from other places that somehow have to come together at a co-packing factory that hires tons of people. All that happens before you spend the $2 it takes to buy that Coke. And all that has to happen on their dime. They have to take all that risk, all that energy, all that stuff out there. And then you get to say, as the person buying that soda, you know, I like it or I don't. You know what I mean? That's what the audience is. And so when musicians, we sit around and we go, well, I spent, 10, 15 years in a practice room honing my craft. Everybody should want to pay me for that. And I get that. But are you an RC Cola or are you a Coke can? What are you in the marketplace, and what are you bringing me that I actually want to purchase? Inevitably, if we spend 20 years practicing what we wanted to practice, but it's not marketable, then we just wasted a lot of time, unless we just really loved it. And so musicians don't think like that, right? We got to think of ourselves as a business. We have a product of music that we have to give to the marketplace and either bring something new that people want to buy, or we have to bring them what they want. And that's how you make money.
If there's no market that we see that's obvious, we say, how do we create a market for it?
Yes.
Which is really key.
And I think a lot of groundwork to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a delicate balance between like playing for, and I've done it before. I play with a local group here because I really believe in the artistic quality of it. And the conductor, they have no budget whatsoever. They make no money. And right now it's a 90% volunteer organization, right? Trying to help build them. But it's like, I can do that because it's rewarding for me, and it's good experience. I enjoy it, but also nobody else is making money, right? So when other people make money, I think that's when we have to be a little bit more careful about whether we're going to offer our services, for free or not. But especially in the entrepreneurial realm, and there are, I think, whether it's teaching or performing, starting your own group, there are opportunities that I think we sometimes are blind to because we're so worried about, I just want to land that orchestra job, or I want to land that other thing because my lane is so narrow. That's what I was taught to do. And personally, I find, I went through that and I was lucky to land some early auditions, but, practicing excerpts is one of the most
exhausting things.
Exhausting and kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? It's so repetitive and mentally kind of like torture, right? Because you're just, it's like, you're trying to work something up to like 132, right? And you start on 84 and you're like, okay, tomorrow we're going to go from 84 to 86. It's incredibly detail oriented work. And the other thing that I found in my career was that, like, I don't write words, I don't write music, but I'm a fairly creative person. And that kind of work is not at all creative, I don't find, right? Like perfecting, whatever the trumpet excerpts are that you're trying to work up for the next audition.
Petrushka or something, yeah.
Petrushka, right? Like, getting Petrushka in your fingers is not a creative act, ultimately. I mean, it's very technical. It's much more like being an athlete, I think, than being a creative person. Whereas if you start your own chamber group and you can program everything and you can commission new works and you can develop the skill of talking to the audience and doing multimedia, like, that's very creative in my mind. So I think one of the things artists have to understand, especially performing artists, is that the creative jobs are more the composers, the writers, the painters, and things like this. And that, like, the executors, like the dancers, the musicians, like what we do is not all that creative at the end of the day.
I'll disagree to a bit.
Yeah.
It's a different type of creativity, right?
Yeah.
So if I go back to my soda analogy, a Coke and a Pepsi are not the same thing.
Right.
They have probably a lot of the same ingredients in them. So if you hear me play Petrushka and you hear somebody else play Petrushka, it's probably going to sound just this much different from each other.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's maybe where I can put my creative spin on it. But really, going back to the concept of value, that's how you establish your value in those arenas, right? You know your audience. Yeah. Like there was a trumpet professor back at UNLV a while ago, back when I was studying there, so many years ago, who had auditioned for the New York Phil 5 times, made the finals 5 times, just never got the gig because once he got in there, him and the principal didn't get along and didn't see eye to eye. And in the end, he was happy with that because he wanted to be his artistic self more than he wanted to fit in the widget. But in the end, they were looking for a certain type of thing. But I think he is more than found avenues for his widget out on the open market. And he's had a very successful career despite that. So, so you can have creativity in something like the orchestral world and all that, and the detail-oriented stuff. It's just going to be less outward.
Yeah, it's more interpretive in a way.
Yeah,
and recreative, but you're interpreting somebody else's work, right?
Yeah, you got to put your little spin in there,
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, jazz is a different world itself. That's very much more creative in a way because you are kind of composing as well, and within that framework. Yeah. But yeah, I think thinking about our value, like I attribute my success was due to the fact that I can make a really nice sound on my instrument, right? And I have a pretty good low register. But like, I'm not the most accurate player in the world. But, I did a gig it happens, right? I got a call for my second or third gig of the year. I'm just not working all that much. And it was like completely out of my comfort zone. It was, it was a showroom gig for PBS for pop singers. And I was really lucky because there was a couple not hard, but very, very exposed solos where you got no warning except 6 clicks in your ear. And I'm like, oh shit, I gotta play that. It's like, I'm not used to that. But like, I was able to make this really gorgeous sound, which kind of forgives like the clams that happened in the earlier piece or whatever it would be, right? So I obsess about the mistakes. That's all I hear is like, God damn it, I didn't do that one thing right or whatever. But then you realize, well, actually everybody else thinks that it went pretty well because in those really exposed moments, I was able to sort of make it work. But I think we all have our various skills, as you say. And, there are certain people who are really good lead players. There are certain people who are really good second and fourth trumpet players, right? There are probably, there's probably a great number of, top players in orchestras who have no good low G on the trumpet, right? Like, so it's knowing what you're good at. I think is so key, and what you bring. And for me, it was always a concept of sound and a beauty of sound that I wasn't hearing with other people, even people that could do all kinds of gymnastic things on the instrument that I couldn't do, right? And it's knowing where your strengths are and how to feed into those and lean into them. Versus for me, like, practicing Beethoven 7 horn 1 would probably be an exercise in great frustration because it's not my strength, right? Like, it's not really where I shine. So I could kill myself to practice it all the time, but like, or I could do what I'm good at, which is like the Nielsen Wind Quintet or something else, So I think that's really important because even within the realm of a very disciplined and narrow field, like the mastery of an instrument, you're going to be good at certain things and not good at other things. And that's okay, right? Because everybody's in that same boat.
In the business world, we teach this in a couple of different ways, right? So there are a lot of people that do what I do as a financial advisor, right? But some people will choose me because of what I bring to the table personality-wise. So it could be somebody wants a super analytical guy to go down every number, and they want to know every interest rate, and they want to maximize alpha, and they want to it's all numbers, and they just want to know every single detail about the numbers. I'm not going to be a good fit for that person, right? I think much more conceptually. Let's get a simple plan together, the one that's going to be foolproof and cover all your bases, and let's just go together with there. So I work great with those clients, right? But part of the other reason people like working with me in the business world is I bring positivity, I bring a faith that we're going to get there, and I educate them in a way that they can understand. I don't talk over them, right? Or I don't bring the knowledge that they're not going to understand. I try to make everything at a kindergarten level so people can pick it up real easy. They have to think too hard in their daily lives at work and kids and everything else. They don't want to come in here and have to be Rhodes Scholars dealing with their financial plan. They want to have to it's like watching TV. They want to be a little bit brain dead and know it's going to work, right? And so we establish that value on the bandstand too, right? Nobody wants to work with a grumpy guy, like you were talking about having a cack and freaking out about it. Nobody wants to sit next to the guy that the entire gig is going, geez, frustrating, all the time. I want to hear positivity. I want to enjoy my experience, like that. Being a good friend, a nice colleague, having a positive attitude, that makes the gig fun. Wouldn't I want to get called then? So the values is established in so many different ways,
Yeah, and I would say that part of the sickness or the toxicity of what we do is that we focus on, oftentimes, if we're classical musicians, we focus alone in a practice room on being as close to perfect as we can be. But actually, when you get into the workplace, your job is not to be perfect. Your job is to make good music and be a good colleague, which you've never had to practice when you're in the practice room playing Petrushka for 100 times in a row. No. And there was I don't know if it was a podcast or something I was listening to where somebody was like, talking about this idea of mission versus what you're doing, right? And they were talking about like the reason railroads went out of business is because they thought they were in the business of building trains, when actually they were in the business of getting things from one place to another, right? And so we're not, if our focus, and I in my career as a labor advocate, I say this, I've said this before, it's like I've never seen a bad person get fired. I've never seen a bad musician get fired. I've seen bad colleagues get fired, right? But it's never because they missed notes. It was because they were just jerks.
Yeah.
And
something untoward. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you're in the practice room for hours and hours, remember that you actually do have to collaborate and be a good colleague. And one of the things that I think is so helpful with really any musician is to do that with chamber music, right? Or a small jazz combo if you play jazz music. Like making music with few people teaches you how to negotiate. It teaches you how to come up with a collective concept of a phrase, how to play in tune without arguing and killing each other. All of those things you learn by playing, in small ensembles. And when I've seen people get into trouble on jobs, it's usually because they haven't developed those skills. It's not because of objectively where they are as far as their degree of perfection, right? Or how good they are,
Yes, that is entirely true. And if you're not doing music for the love of music, right? That's one of the hard parts that we go through is suddenly we start getting paid for something. What's the old adage? If you want to hear a musician complain, get him a gig. But we become so obsessed with the connection between music and money that we lose sight of why we do it in the first place. And my hope is that we all do it for the love of it. So in your practice, right? In my daily practice as a finance guy or as an advisor, I'm reading and listening and doing all these things, doing workshops and all that stuff I don't get paid for. But that's what makes me more knowledgeable and better. I'm also meeting with clients for things that I don't get paid for, just reviewing things, talking to them, educating them, doing seminars. I don't get paid for any of that, but all it brings more value and it keeps me better. And so you're talking about practicing chamber and practicing all, jazz and all these other things that you may not make a full-time living with, but those feed your soul. Those feed the music. They feed the love. They keep you interested in. So when you go do that gig, great.
Yeah.
And it's really hard when you think about establishing a fair wage for your time. There isn't a such thing. Even if, let's say, a show came in the Smith Center and they wanted me for 2 weeks, and let's say I was going to make $2,500 for the 2-week run, I'm going to have to put in a month of practice prior to that.
Right.
To be in shape enough to play the show, to be able to understand all the cues, so that we only have one rehearsal and we're going to hit the run, right? Economically, it makes zero sense to do that. No business person would extend that much time for that little pay. It just would not happen.
Yeah.
It's not possible for us to get paid what we're technically worth. So how you feed yourself and keep in shape and do all those things is you just be in music all the time.
Yeah.
And then when you do get something that pays, you explore that avenue and you find new ways to bring something new. But you're not going to do that unless you're experimenting and playing all the time and trying new stuff and bringing something valuable to the market. But we sit and we just wait for that phone to ring, and then we criticize the value of what somebody's paying us on the other end. And I don't know that we ever think about what we need to be doing to constantly be forwarding the art form, educating the public, doing free concerts, building the culture. So when they do hear something amazing, they're willing to pay for it. They've been trained,
Yeah. And that's really important and a really good insight. And, I can give you an example of where I volunteered to teach. It was only a couple days because I couldn't really fit it into my schedule, but it was at a band camp this summer. And, I enjoy working with kids because it reminds me of, one, my passion for why I do what I do, but also how is it, like, I'm always thinking about technical process of how to play the instrument. Like, well, how do I improve my teaching, right? And the best way to do that is to be around people that are learning. And so I didn't get a fee, and I was happy to donate my time because it's a nonprofit that I believe in and all that stuff. But I ended up getting a student out of it, and it was like, this is why we do this. And the other lesson I learned this summer was I had made an offer to some students that I work with at our local arts high school. And I said, well, for the summer, I'm going to give you like this discounted rate, right? It's a summer special. And like one kid took, was interested, and then, he ended up having one lesson and then never really following up. So when I got this other call, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to give a discount because I don't think that's actually a motivator for people. I don't think that's the barrier. If they want to learn, they're going to pay me the value that I put on my teaching, which is, I don't think any more or less than other teachers are teaching for in this area, right? Like I'm trying to meet this sort of standard, and it's like, actually, no, that was not a barrier for this student. And if people are dedicated, they'll find a way, right? And often money is not the motivator for why things happen. And I had erroneously made this assumption that like lowering my price would get me more students, and actually it didn't at all. And then raising my price didn't prevent me from getting students. So, it's again, I think part of this subconscious narrative that we always have about, well, I can't charge too much, or, and in some cases, if a student is genuinely in need, I would consider like a scholarship rate or something like that. But so far, I haven't encountered those students yet. So it was a lesson to me in like valuing myself.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And what you want the market to bring, right? Inspecting what you expect. So if you want top quality students, then you want people that are invested.
Yeah.
And people who are invested will make the investment. They'll pay the money. People who are not invested, they won't pay the money, or they'll be happy. Some parent will happily pay you $20 an hour to have you babysit their kid for an hour, and you'll get nowhere and you'll waste your time. You'll be frustrated and all that stuff. But I don't know that a parent's willing to pay you $70 an hour to babysit their kid.
Right.
They want to see some results, right? So when they're paying handsomely for it, then they're expecting a result just as much as you are. And when you have a bunch of students that are as invested in their progress as you are, they're naturally going to be getting better and better and better, and that will get around.
Yeah.
Your students are sitting in the top of All-State. They're growing. They're getting better. They're going on to scholarships, and everybody wants that. And so then they're going to come to Michael Mann,
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
So the lesson of this podcast is that everybody listening should take horn lessons from me.
Yes, absolutely. Whether you're a flute player or not, it doesn't matter.
You don't even have to you don't have to own the instrument. I will teach you anyway.
That's like, being a knee surgery, right? Like, hey, your shoulder hurts. Great. I'm going to fix it with knee surgery. Let's go.
Exactly. It'll transfer. I'm sure.
Yeah, it totally will.
But, the other thing I was thinking was, if it's not like, maybe it's a stretch for somebody, but they can, they don't have to come to me every week. I don't require that. They can come every 2 weeks, but I would rather get the rate that I feel that I'm worth every 2 weeks than charge less and have a less dedicated student showing up every week. Right. So, I think it's a really important thing, is like, it's very empowering when you realize that you can focus on your value and demand your value.
Yeah.
That you feel that you're worth.
Yeah. And you should demand the same of yourself as you do from other people. So if you demand this high level of investment and motivation and care and work and everything, but you're sitting around most days watching TV and not investing in your own personal growth, then you're not worthy of what you're asking them to pay you.
Right. And
it's hard on you to work and put the sweat in and the equity so that you can feel confident in demanding that, because you are worth it and you are.
Yeah. And it does raise our own expectations for ourselves. I mean, I'm like, well, I've got a student that, at least one, maybe more, who knows, but I've got one student who's serious enough to pay me the rate that I feel like I'm worth, right? So I better learn, which I hate doing, but I'm doing it, right? I better learn Muse Score, I think it is, which is like a free version of Finale, because I've got to be able to put the things that I'm going to teach them into musical form, because I have a very methodical process that involves slurring on the harmonics, and I've got to put it on paper. I can't just wing it with the students. So it kind of like made me realize that I have to take this seriously too, if I'm going to charge other people for what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of students because I used to do a lot of teaching. I don't have enough time to do it now, but I lost a lot of students for a long time because I always thought as a teacher, they just show up and you teach them for an hour, right? You tell them to buy this book and then you'll write down an assignment and they'll do the thing and they'll bring it in. But I hardly ever had any materials of my own other than just a few books that were for most students that I could work with, until I realized and saw out there, people are putting together video recordings of lessons and websites where you can log in and have content. I mean, they're taking it seriously like a business, where I was just like, it's a hobby. I just show up and teach. Well, there's a wonder why those guys are killing it. As teachers, because they're offering incredible value. If you just feel like teaching is, I'm supposed to show up, you're not going to make a lot of money doing it. And you're not even going to have a lot of fun doing it. You're going to get babysitting kids. But if you bring all the crosses to bear and new ideas and making it a professional, polished product that you're offering, then people will flock to it. Because 80% of people in business suck at it. They really do. They're really terrible about it. But 20% of them understand that all they have to do is be a little bit better than that 80%. And they're going to be great. So you bring a polished product to the game and you're going to do great. I don't care what it is, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many tools now that I'm just still learning about and getting comfortable with. But like, TikTok is a great tool that a lot of people are using, creating content videos. I mean, I'm dating somebody who's younger than I am. And it's really funny because if we're looking for a restaurant or something, I'll go to Yelp and he will go to TikTok. Like his feed of information for life is TikTok. I don't understand it because I'm not a TikTok person, but it's like huge. And I'm just like, wow, I better figure this out, because in terms of getting yourself out there and building those followers of people that know, like, and trust you, like that's the way to go. And I'm not even getting my feet wet in it yet, but I know it's something I'm going to have to do if I want to build my teaching studio, for one thing.
Oh, get this. I just went to a conference in Boston, and in our industry, there's this thing called a $1 Million Roundtable. And it's generally once you hit a certain level in your career and you're really good at what you do, then there's this industry group that you can go and do conferences with, and you learn much. There's another level to the rabbit hole that you never knew about, right? And so we go to this, and I heard a speaker talking about having your virtual reality office up and running already. There are financial advisors that you can already meet in VR. Like, I haven't even thought about such a thing. Like, I'm with you. I'm not even good at TikTok, let alone having a virtual reality store. People can throw a thing on and come meet me. But it's where everything's going to head eventually. So,
and it's really been transformative. I mean, I've noticed it just in my work, right? Like, so traditionally, I'll use an example of a labor negotiation, right? You would have all the bigwigs from the media companies, arguing why they shouldn't pay us more money. And then you would have everybody from the union side and maybe two player representatives in the room, right? Because you're all physically in the same space. It's costly to get people out there. They have to make room in their schedule because they have to have travel days on either side. Whereas during COVID, doing these negotiations over Zoom, we could have 20 workers in the room, right? Speaking of their stories and their making their arguments for why they needed to be respected in the way they did.